Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Free Training Friday. My name is Kaylee White. I am a marketing coordinator here at Abacus Next. And today we have with us the Director of Education at Abacus Next, Philip Ferris. And we will be going over advanced project tracking in OfficeTools. This will be about a 30-minute webinar. We will take your questions during the last 10 minutes. So please do feel free to insert your questions in the webinar control pane. And we are recording this, so don't worry about taking notes or anything like that. You will receive a recording of this webinar later in the day or early next week. So without further ado, I'll let Philip take over. Hey, Philip.
Hi, Kaylee, and thank you everybody for joining us. Again, the subject of the webinar today is advanced project tracking in OfficeTools. Now, this is a big topic. You know, projects are a complex area of the application, so to speak. There's a lot of moving parts. So really what we're going to focus on is a little bit more about some areas where tracking projects can be handled, can be done. Some areas that we may not be familiar with, but they can give us a lot of insight about what's going on with the projects. We're not going to be talking about how to set projects up or any of that stuff. It's more about, again, just where are they at, who's working on them, you know, and how to manage them, things of that sort. So I'm going to put some polling questions up also. And the first one here is a little bit as we approach the end of the year. You know, it's important that we start taking some considerations about how we do these webinars in the future. So the first question, the first polling question I'm going to put up is about moving to a different day of the week. You know, Fridays are great, but a lot happens on Fridays. So this is an opportunity for everybody to vote real quick and kind of humor, you know, with a little bit of humor on what day would we like to perhaps consider changing these webinars to. And I'll let this run for just a moment. I will have another polling question towards the end, just a little bit. So some things that we're going to talk about again in today's webinar are going to be reports. We're going to cover reports a little bit. Okay. We're going to also talk a little bit about project management. We're going to talk about budgets too, but just a little bit. I do want to cover budgets just a little, in that it's important that we understand that when we're managing projects, especially from an advanced point of view, and we're tracking things, that the budget is an important part of all of that. So I want to make sure that we, you know, we address that accordingly. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to waste any more time. We're going to jump right into OfficeTools, and we're going to go ahead and start talking about a couple of these things. So the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to advanced project tracking are reports. Reports are very, very important. We know how important reports can be from a billing perspective, but a lot of people do underestimate reporting from a project tracking point of view. So there's a couple reports that are important. Okay. Again, everybody gets a little bit different information out of reports depending on what you're looking for, but the three that I'm going to point out right out of the gate that are really, really important are going to come down to the current status project report, the due date project report, and I'm even going to throw in there a little bit the history report. Okay, so between these three, really what we're trying to say is, well, what projects do we have that are coming up? Okay, that's going to be your due date report. What projects are we currently working on? That's going to be the current status. And then what were projects last period? Okay, that's going to be your history report. And between the three of those, you can get a lot of information. So for example, if we were to look at the current status, okay, for all of our projects, we now have some filters and tools available to us. All right, perhaps we want to know, we're trying to figure out staffing needs, and we want to know how many projects need to be reviewed or are going to be reviewed. Okay, we can go to the current status, we can go ahead and actually choose that assignment. All right, review, and then we can go ahead and run that report. What's important to state about these is there is another option down here on the bottom about showing unprocessed records. So as anybody who's using projects should understand, is an unprocessed project is a project that hasn't started. So in any of these reports, if you want to include the projects that you haven't really started working on for one reason or another, maybe due dates, for example, it's important that we check that box. It's also likewise important that we do have various filters in here if needed, okay, such as specific types of projects or specific years. And that'll go a long way to make the report make some sense. So I'm going to leave these kind of as vague as I can right now so we can get some good data, and I'm just going to go ahead and double click on this report real quick and run it. So what we can see here is all of our clients over on the left. All right, we can see the projects that we're currently working on for those clients, along with various details, such as who's working on them and their initials, the status or the step, the current assignment that's being worked on, along with its due date, okay, time in office, and so on and so forth. Some other really important details about this report are obviously the due date here on the end. But I would also say that the promise date and receive date are critical also. We want to make sure that our turnaround times are appropriate. So I could throw a couple filters on here, sort it slightly different, and get kind of a different view about my projects and what I'm looking for. So when it comes to tracking them, this is a very good report when it comes to what are we working on right now? What is the current status of projects right now? That's a great report for that. I would follow that up then perhaps with a due date report. Okay, again, very similar in a lot of ways. This has the show unprocessed, but one big difference about this one is it shows completed also. You may want to run a due date report and actually see what you've already finished. All right, and if that's the case, make sure you check that box. Likewise, you have a lot of filters, okay, a lot of sort options, and so on. And you can also change that. For example, it makes sense in most cases to sort this by contact by project, but you might want to flip that around actually. You might want to sort this by project by client and get yourself a different perspective about the work that you're providing. So we can take this report, and again, I'll go ahead and run a partial detail of this just to give everybody kind of an idea about what this report might end up looking like. And again, it's going to be very similar in a lot of ways. Okay, we're going to have our projects on the left and then our clients. What's different about this report is not only does it show completed projects if we want it to, but it also gives us a little bit more of detail on those due dates, okay, and notes and other location area details about this project. So they're very similar in a lot of the information, but how they're going to present that information, it might be a little bit more critical to know what's coming up versus what you're working on right now. And this report will help you kind of clarify those things. And then finally, the last report that I would say really garners a little bit extra attention is probably the history report. Again, it's going to show us a lot of details about the project, but it's going to give you a little bit more historical details such as checklists, project notes, things of that sort. So those are the three reports you want to check out when dealing with projects. Now, the more information that you put into a project, the better. And you might want to make a lot of changes to projects as you're working on them. Okay, whether it's changing some details, who's assigned, things of that sort. So now I'm actually going to go over to the project tab. All right, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Manage button right here. So I'm going to put a little asterisk next to this. This particular option actually has a very specific user right. All right, and now that user right is protected in the staff user right section and should only be given to those who understand its capabilities. And the reason that I mentioned that, the reason I bring that up is because this function allows you to do a lot of things within OfficeTools and projects very, very quickly. And that's obviously what we want to do. But we can cause a lot of damage here too if we don't know what we're doing. But advanced project tracking is very, very important, and the Manage button here is going to allow us to do a lot of things in that context. So if I open it up, what I'll actually see is every project in the system. All right, so I can see all the projects that I currently have inside of OfficeTools. On the bottom, I have a lot of buttons that are going to show me, all the different things that I'm able to do with these projects. So while we could spend a lot of time going through every possible option here, it's basically a way of managing your projects at an advanced level in bulk is one good way of thinking about it. So I could come in here, for example, to give you guys a use case. Let's say that I need to move a lot of projects to extension. All right, April's going to come and go. we need to circle back around in October. I just want to move these projects forward. You don't have to go in there client by client to do that. All right, you can simply open up the Manage Projects windows here and use your filters to then narrow down all those projects. So for example, I'd come in here and I'd say, okay, well, I only want my 1040s. All right, or perhaps only a certain staff or projects that are on a certain assignment. All right, all the projects that are not already being e-filed, those are going to extension, for example. So you can have these tools to filter this list down. And now what you get is just that, a list of projects that you filtered. All right. You can then select all of those projects once you have your filtering down, and you can begin to change and modify their values. All right. I'll just go ahead and select some here to show you real quick. So now I can come in here and I can mark them all complete if I wanted to. I can change some details about these projects, or I can go ahead and move to extension or change the date to whatever I'd like it to be. And I can do that in one screen with very minimal clicks, very, very fast. It would go through every project that I have filtered and apply whatever changes I've made. And that's really handy. That saves a lot of time. There's also the problem of old projects or clients who aren't coming back anytime soon, so you want to clean up their projects, or a staff member needs to go on leave for a while, so you need to reassign their work. Whatever it may be, the Manage Projects allows you to track not only every project that you're working on, but to actually change those details. Again, the reports are really just that. They're just reports, right? They're going to tell you when things are due. They're going to tell you who's working on it, give you some granular detail about what's happening within that project. But the Manage Projects button on the project screen is going to allow you to actually change those details. Now, it doesn't let you change everything. All right, I can't change budget details and things of that in here necessarily, but you can do a lot of other things. So get familiar with it, control it as necessary, again, because you can do a lot in here very, very easily. Again, there's a lot of room for people making mistakes potentially. So protect it, guard it, but when needed, it's a very, very powerful tool and very helpful when it comes to tracking and managing projects. I use it, to be honest with you, in some cases as a simple version of a reporting tool, where if I wanted to know how many of a certain project I was working on, I would just come in here, throw a couple filters, see what's going on. Not in lieu of a report, but just kind of as a quick on-screen reference. So those are some important things there. So another area about projects when it comes to tracking things is not just the project as a whole. So the reports are going to tell you what projects you're working on, when it's due. The manage screen is going to allow you to modify those project details in bulk. But there's also tracking of all of the assignments within your projects. That's very, very important. So there's really the best place to start with that is going to be the work list. And again, if you're using projects at all, this should be very familiar to you. I'll show you a couple of things that you may not be familiar with necessarily though. So I have a project on the screen here. You know, it's a little old, but I'm sure everybody here understands. I got an individual return. I can see down here that I have some estimated time. I have some actual time tracked. That's great. My work list budget is lit up red, telling me that there's actually something in here, and I can open it up and I can go ahead and see what's been worked on. Okay, so I can see that Sally, you know, did some scanning on the front end there, and Joe is actually doing the tax prep. Great. Now when Joe's done, we know it moves to the next step and so on and so forth. So some things that you can do here that you may not be aware of is on the work list budget, up at the top here, there's actually these gears. And these gears will allow you to toggle on and off additional details. For example, budgets. So by default, it may actually look like this, that Sally and Joe are doing some work. It was assigned to them. It's due on a certain date, and they may or may not have completed it, and that's really about it. But you can also track your budget details down to the assignment level from within here by opening up the gears and turning on budgets. So now I can see how much time they actually spent on that work and whether they're over or under on budgets. All right, you can add notes in here and expand those note details. You can also, now this isn't necessarily a tracking thing, this is a little bit more of a management, but you can also create assignments from within here. So you can come up to the plus button within the work list and add an assignment right from here. So you don't necessarily have to complete the previous step or wait for it to come up. You can go ahead and actually assign work out prior to its kind of logical order of steps, ahead of time, so to speak. And that can be, again, very, very helpful. So the work list budget is important because it does allow you to do a lot of those things. You can also change stuff, obviously. If there was an error or a mistake and Joe's actually not preparing, he's doing something else, then I can open it up very quickly and go ahead and make that change. And this is important for when it comes to tracking who's doing what. Now, I would add to that this particular area of the program, just like Manage, should be restricted based on user rights. Not everybody should have access to this. And the reason I mention that is because the budgetary details. I mean, there's other reasons, but the budget again, if you give people access to this area, you may or may not want them actually to have access to the budgets and modifying these assignments. So think about that before you give everybody rights to it, because not everybody needs to come in here to track things. This is a higher level kind of function. But it does give you the ability to make a lot of changes to a particular project relatively quickly. Okay, so now the last area that I'm going to talk a little bit about when it comes to tracking is tracking time and budgets for projects. Now, if you're not tracking your time to a project, I think you're missing a good opportunity. Won't beat anybody up about time tracking today, but there is a really good opportunity to add more value to the work of tracking time. And what I mean by that is, yes, we want to track time for billing purposes. We obviously want to track time for payroll if we're doing that also in OfficeTools. But when it comes to projects and tracking projects from an advanced level, having budget information is really important, and it doesn't take any extra work. And what I mean by that is when I track time, if I simply just select the project that it's associated to, I've already started filling in my actual, which is half of my budget, so to speak. So when you have projects in the system, I would highly recommend that you come into the project and you put in estimated values. Time, fee would be another good one. This would be what ultimately you would like to charge the client for the work, and see how the numbers play out. You can then set up options to have these values roll over to the next period, to go back to the original. For example, let's say that my budget is 5 hours, okay, and I spent a little over 3 hours doing the work. I can have either the 3 hours roll over or the 5 hours roll over, depending on how I want my budgets to work moving forward. All right. You can do the same with the fee. If you charge $750 this year, you can have that roll over and charge the client $750 next year. Or if you decide at the last moment that you want to charge them $800, you can have that value roll over. So there's not a lot of work to get values in these areas, but they can give you a lot of tools later on if you need them. But there's something kind of important about when it comes to tracking and advanced project stuff that's important to know about projects. You actually have 2 layers of budgets. All right, you have your project level budget, and that's what you're seeing here. But you also have your assignment budgets. So if we go back into the work list, we can actually put budgets on these items here. So you can say this project, regardless of the assignments, is going to be 5 hours. Or you can say that these 5 assignments are going to be 1 hour each. And you can manage the assignment layer or the assignment level budgets from the work list, which is why kind of obviously we call it the work list / budget. So if you want to do that, you would simply come to the system, hit the plus button, say add a budget. All right, and from here you can start to preload things. You can say, well, when it gets to review, I want a particular staff member to do it. We'll say Sally is going to go ahead and review it. And down here there's an estimated hours, and I'm going to give Sally 2 hours to review this particular project. And we're done. That's now visible in the system. All the steps are there. We can see Sally's budget. And we're done. Now here's something to keep in mind. If you're going, and this is very important, so if budgets on projects has piqued your interest a little bit, we may want to get together on the phone and do some one-on-one training to go into more depth. But here's the crux. You can't have both. So what I mean by that is you can't have a 5-hour project budget, but then only budget 2 hours of work. Do you see what I mean? It's either the entire project is going to be 5 hours and the assignments have no budget, or the accumulated total of all of your assignments equals what your budget is. So you can see now by giving Sally 2 hours of a budget on her review assignment, it has actually changed my project budget to reflect that. So we're kind of forcing you to make a decision here. If you're going to start budgeting on your assignments, if you're going to track budgets to assignment at the assignment level, you're committing to doing that for all of the assignments. Now, that doesn't mean every single assignment needs a value, needs a budget number, but it means that that's what the total project budget will be when you enter those in. So now I could go back in here, work list budget, and I can say, well, I know it's a 5-hour project. I gave Sally 2 hours, so I'm going to go ahead and add another budget, and I'm going to give somebody else the other 3. Okay, maybe it goes back to prep after it's been reviewed because there were some things in there, so I'll go ahead and choose that assignment. Then I'm going to go ahead and put 3 more hours back in here for this step. So now my project has a total of 5 hours budgeted based on the assignments, and that is what's going to be reflected on the project screen. Okay, so again, you get one or the other, project as a whole or per assignment. And again, you can track all of those details you know, from the work list budget screen, from the various reports areas. They're not really visible in the manage section, but that's okay. You're going to want to go to the work list budget or the reports for all of your budget details for projects. Okay, the last thing, this is going to be a little thing I'm going to throw in there at the last moment, is don't forget about your missing info. When it comes to tracking projects, I think this is overlooked. And what's so funny about this particular thing is I've had people who've used OfficeTools projects for years, and they don't realize, and maybe it's just because it's so obvious we kind of are blind to it, but they don't realize that there's a whole section in the middle of projects just for tracking missing information, missing documents. So if you're not using this, if you're doing this in your tax software, I get it, that's fine, won't argue that point, but this is really easy to use. You simply just drop in what items you might be missing, and then if you need to, there's an email button here at the top, you just email that to the client. Sends them a formatted email, says, hey, we need your signatures and your W-2s and your 1099s and whatever it may be, whatever you have in your missing info list here. So when it comes to tracking things in projects, the missing info section, while very obvious, is not used, I believe, enough. So everybody should check that out if they're already doing it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open this up now to, while we have a couple minutes left, to any questions. So these questions, there's a question area in the control panel. So I'm also going to go ahead and run the last polling question here in just a moment. But if you have any questions about projects, about tracking projects, about workflow, really anything in OfficeTools, then please let me know. Okay, so great questions here. So there's a question about reports being exported in Excel format. Yes, absolutely. Any report can be exported into Excel. When you run a report, and I'll just go to the report screen here real quick and try to show you. When you run any report in OfficeTools, and I'll just run this guy real quick. There's actually a button up here on the top left screen. It may be hard to see. There's a little button in the very top left corner, and this allows you to export. You can do it to PDF. You can do it to, obviously, Excel, various things of that sort. All right. There's also a question here about a budget model that can be copied from one project to another. Not necessarily a budget model, but you can create a default budget for each project. So what I mean by that is you can say tax returns are this budget, bookkeeping is this budget, you know, corporate returns are different, partnership returns are different, so on and so forth. So at the project definition level, you can create budgets. But there's no kind of model that you would build and then apply it to a project. It's more on a project definition level. And while we're going through the questions here, while people ask more questions, I'm going to go and throw up the last polling question. So as everybody may know, OfficeTools, the parent company of OfficeTools, Abacus Next, and one of the great products that they offer is the Abacus Private Cloud, which is a secure cloud solution. If you'd like some more information on it, if you'd like a demo or even just some more information, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to reach out to you, get you some things about it. If you haven't considered going to the cloud, this is a great opportunity to marry OfficeTools and that solution together. If you have and you're using a different provider, again, there's some opportunity to maybe learn a little bit more about why APC is you know, a good solution when it comes to security. But let me know. Let that run for just a moment. Okay. Any more questions anybody have before we start wrapping up here? Those were some good questions about the Excel thing too. That's something I don't cover very often, so thank you for mentioning that and bringing that up. Okay, I'll go ahead and close down that poll. Okay, no more questions coming through, so we're going to go ahead and kind of cut to the end here real quick. I want to thank everybody so much for joining me. There is, again, some more things that you can find out you know, on our website, so you can go to officetools.com or you can go to abacusnext.com for any additional information about APC or OfficeTools cybersecurity, all that. There's a lot of great information there, so check those out. And I want to thank everybody very much for attending.
Thank you so much, Phil, for another great Friday. Hope everybody has a wonderful weekend.